following program contains unfiltered political discourse and opinions with which you may disagree. If that's not your thing, turn back now. Still here? Well, strap yourself in, folks, because you're about to get shell-shocked.
Greetings, denizens of the internet. It is your favorite host, DJ Trump, living rent-free in your heads. Tonight, I have my perennial co-host, George the Vanguard, and we are going to discuss what was an electrifying vice presidential debate. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I think we learned a lot about policy and which of these candidates is the better pick in the event that their frontman, the president, is no longer able to perform their duties, as seemingly is going to be increasingly likely both potential presidents, if elected, will be the oldest serving president to be elected. I mean, just for specification, Trump will be 74 if he takes office in January once again, and Biden will be 78. And as we've both seen, they've had some serious health scares. President Trump just got COVID. It seems he's recovering very well, but it certainly reminds everyone that the president is a mortal man. And Joe Biden is just all over the place. It is something to watch.
Yep, I think it's really interesting to watch these debates, because remember, the vice presidential debate. There are three presidential debates now. This time, and we'll talk about this later, there probably aren't going to be, but traditionally there are, and there's always only one vice presidential debate, and that's after the first presidential debate. And it's just kind of it's just not necessarily considered the most important event. I don't know how many people watch it. I do think, I mean, a lot, obviously, but not nearly as many as the regular presidential debates. And also, because it's the second in commands who are, going at loggerheads rather than the presidential nominees, it's a little bit less of a high stakes game. Now, this time it's higher stakes than usual because, again, we have two men, both of whom have legitimate health concerns and just are generally old. So that's a real reason to want to make sure, more so than even usual, that the vice presidential nominees are ready to lead, and also going to lead in a way that is compatible with life, liberty, and property, and all those other good things. So I think that's probably my first comment there, is just that it makes it a little bit of a different event. But I think also this particular event has something in common with 2016's vice presidential debate. Not just that Vice President Pence, back then Governor Pence, was in it, but that he mopped the floor with a Democratic senator as his opponent. In the past, in 2016, that was Tim Kaine, who had been selected by Hillary Clinton as her vice presidential nominee, and this time it's Kamala Harris. But
with Tim Kaine, I will look forward to working with you when you go back to the Senate. That was one of those low-key zingers that people don't talk about as much. But Pence can be polite and absolutely brutal at the same time, and we saw a lot of that tonight. Also, just to put some context into the importance of the vice presidential debate, in this cycle, for the first presidential debate, 73 million people tuned in, at least. I mean, there might have been more people streaming, but 73 million people on the cable networks.
One example of somebody streaming.
Right. And for the vice presidential debate, more than 50 million people were watching. So that is a noticeable drop-off, but still 50 million people were watching them debate at least.
And let's assume that, I think it's fair to say probably 90% of the people watching at least were voters. I doubt that many people who weren't registered voters were watching. So even if it's 80%, that's 40 million people. Even assuming some of the highest turnout estimates, some people were thinking turnout may go up above 160 million. I don't quite buy that. Even then, that's a quarter of voters. And, more likely, turnout's going to be more like maybe 140 million is my median estimate, maybe a little higher than that. And assuming, something like 45 million voters, that's well over a third, well over a quarter, maybe even closer to a third, depending on how the numbers exactly line up. But that's a lot of voters. And again, most of them probably already had their minds made up. And this is even less likely than, say, a presidential debate to change minds. But even a few changed minds in the right states makes a huge difference.
Right. So let's say 50 million potential voters. Let's use the higher end of the estimate, assuming that some of the people who are streaming are also potential voters, and they balance out some of the people who are watching on TV and can't vote. If just 1% of those people have their minds changed, that's 500,000 votes right there. And if you guys remember 2016, that was a lot closer than 500,000 votes. So,
oh, yeah. I mean, even if like 0.1% change, that's 50,000 changed votes. And depending on whether that means flipped from one candidate to the other, or dragging people to turn out, or changing them from third party or to third party, even that could be critical. Because, you know, they say it's about 70,000 votes in 2016 that decided Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And, you know, again, that could easily happen this time around. Maybe it could happen, say that Florida gets closer, but is still, you know, closer than it was last time around.
Hanging Chad is still looming in the background.
Yeah, hanging Chad.
You thought the hanging Chads were bad. Mail-in ballot controversies. This is going to be an absolute legal nightmare.
I'm not excited to hear what the hell Broward County is going to be doing. That is going to be a disaster.
Let's talk. Let's take it even further than Florida. It's going to be a national catastrophe because so many places have changed their policy at the last minute. They're going to be battling legal teams. Might go all the way to the Supreme Court, which of course is going to be something that's going to be extremely relevant to the analysis of this debate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Wayne County in Michigan, that's where Detroit is. That's going to be a disaster. Milwaukee County, Wisconsin is going to be a disaster. I'd say Philadelphia County in Pennsylvania is going to be bad. Honestly, even Dane County in Wisconsin, Macomb County, which is a big suburban county in Michigan. And for reference, Dane County is where the capital of Wisconsin, Madison, is, and the second biggest city. These places, all these swing states, is going to be just horrendous. Like, I don't know what is supposed to happen here, what's going to get counted, what's not going to get counted. It's a mess.
Right. I mean, I think also it's going to be important to note that a lot of people were really paying attention tonight, and I think that will have an outsized impact on the election. A vice president wants to characterize his position by, I am nothing, but I could become everything. And of course, he didn't become the president, and nobody remembers who he is. I don't remember the name of the man who said that quote. But either one of these people could be the president. And if Kamala Harris is elected the vice president, the majority of voters, even I think 49% of Democrats, think that she's going to be the president because Joe Biden will not be able to serve out a full term. Obviously, that number is higher with independents and Republicans, who have generally higher negative perceptions of Joe Biden's mental and physical health. But with that in mind, with that being a key element of the analysis, we need to look into how people thought the debate went. And I think you and I certainly have very strong opinions about how the debate went, but I want to look at some of the polling data. So Frank Luntz, I believe, did a focus group of 15 people, not necessarily representative, but a start. And
they were all ostensibly undecided. That's important to note, though.
Right, and 13 out of the 15 said that they thought Pence took it. And I think Telemundo did a poll where it was something close to 76% thought that Pence won. I've seen anything ranging from high 50s to low to mid 70s saying that Pence absolutely obliterated Kamala Harris. And George and I both happened to be in a group chat with some of our friends from college, and we were essentially live tweeting the debate without tweeting out publicly, although in the future that might be something we should do. But I can summarize very quickly with just a quick clip how we reacted to the various moments in the debate and just the general tenor of that text conversation.
When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. Yeah. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Vice President
We fought for
Pence.
educational choice and opportunities for African Americans, all of our
Thank you,
minorities.
sir.
And we'll do it for 4
Thank you.
years.
So, if you didn't watch the debate, if you weren't paying attention, or if you weren't with friends, just picture that last clip essentially looped for 90 minutes. It was spectacular. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life. George and I have both debated public policy in front of an audience, albeit several orders of magnitude smaller. I think ours capped out somewhere between 50 and 100. But nevertheless, very often I find, and I don't know if I can speak for George, but I imagine it'll be pretty similar, that when I'm watching a policy debate, very often the opposing side will make a point, and I will be squirming in my seat saying, please respond with this, please respond with this, because you know the counterpoint and you want to hear it because it'll absolutely demolish them. And 9 times out of 10, Mike Pence delivered immediately. Like we were on the same wavelength. It was amazing. I remember thinking, please talk about her prosecutorial incompetence and corruption, please, please, please. And then he did it right away. He brought up the riots when it wasn't going to be brought up at all. He brought up the Supreme Court and really pushed her on it when they were really trying to take that in a completely different direction. Mike Pence was aggressive without coming off as rude, and he really hit on all the points that he needed to hit on in order to really sell the Trump agenda. He brought up the swine flu, which is incredibly difficult to do because if you try and do that, people say, oh, you're minimizing the danger of the coronavirus. And it was really important because the Obama administration, of which Joe Biden was a prominent member, completely failed at containing the swine flu. So if it had been anywhere near as deadly as coronavirus, we would have seen untold chaos. So that was an incredibly important point and one that needed to be made. So I think there was an entire night of that. I think that Mike Pence is now looking like an incredibly strong contender going into 2024. I remember there was similar talk in 2016 among some circles where people watched that debate and wondered, why is he not at the top of the ticket? And I'm not entirely on board with that because as much as I respect Mike Pence and think that he did a phenomenal job last night, President Trump is his own kind of wonderful, with just throwing bombs and zingers and just being a bombastic guy. But for organized and well-structured debate, Mike Pence is one of the greatest of all time. Just maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but I have not seen a more lopsided debate in recent memory.
I would agree. I think, well, and especially if you control for, one-on-one debates. Like, I mean, primary debates where you have all these different people on the stage, those are just a joke. I mean, I'll be honest, they're just, I don't even really consider those to be terribly serious. I mean, you can't really take them seriously. But I think that at least as one-on-one candidate debates go, particularly ones that are between parties rather than within parties, that was a pretty lopsided debate. I'd also like to note just a couple things that I think Pence really hit well. I think he really demolished a lot of Kamala Harris's credibility in terms of black issues. You know, the idea that she's some sort of racial healer. He pointed out that when she was DA of San Francisco, for low-level drug offenses, black offenders were 19 times as likely to be charged with them that as white and Latino offenders. So I mean, I think he pointed out that she sits here and talks about disparate impact and whatever, but if you judge her on that criterion, her record is atrocious. I mean, genuinely horrendous. And I think that it's very hard for me to see how people don't see that he won this. Now, I will say there was a Politico Morning Consult poll that had her winning debate by 51 to 40%. But the thing to note about that focus group, so not even all 13 of those 15 undecided voters agree with Pence on policy, but there was at least one, if not a couple, who mentioned that they disagree with him on policy, but he won the debate. Like, he just was a better debater. He did it better. He brought up better substance, etc. I honestly think that a lot of these, so one thing I will caution, national polls suck. Let me repeat that. National polls suck. even totally nonpartisan political analysts, and of course political analysts of both parties as well, and of both ideological camps, agree that national polls don't have a lot of meaning. National polls suggested that Mitt Romney was about to win the presidential election in 2012. National polls suggested that Trump was worse off in 2016 than the state level polls did, but even though the state level polls are really bad. But it's important to note that national polls do not take into account differences in voting laws in different states that make it easier or harder to vote, and in some cases easier or harder to vote illicitly. They also don't take into account the relative turnout rates of states. You know, Texas, for example, was a relatively low turnout state. Minnesota is a very high turnout state. They don't really address a lot of the local nuances particular to each state's turnout patterns. Because again, if you're conducting a national poll, one, you just have to get whoever you can. It's hard enough to get enough people in a national poll to get anything close to a representative sample. And two, you have people running it who don't know every state. If you're doing a state level poll, you are usually from that state and you usually know how to poll that state effectively. For example, the gold standard, at least, of Wisconsin is, just because I know I was talking about it with another friend of mine recently who wanted to bring up a couple of these states. Its gold standard is the Marquette University poll. In Iowa, the gold standard is, I believe, J.N. Seltzer is sort of their best poll. Different states have their different best pollsters, but national polls are a joke. So I went into that rant, but circling back, when I see these 51 to 40 national polls, or even any sort of polls that are national and just have no particular selection for particular demographics, I don't buy it. You know, no matter who it favors, I think that if you're saying national and you're not even going down by demographic, like for example, the Telemundo polls, like I imagine there's no way that like that's representative of all Latinos, but I would say Trump's doing better with them than he did in 2016 and better than Republicans have for a while. But, you know, again, at least that's drilling down into a certain demographic, Spanish speakers, people who watch Spanish language news, watch Telemundo, right? Whereas these national polls, like there's no way you can get any reasonable bearing on the entire state of the U.S. population. And even if, you know, the polls say that the Trump ticket is up by 11 points or down by 11 points, theoretically you could still be winning the Electoral College depending on how that's distributed. And, you know, you don't really know how everything is distributed. So I think it's very important to keep that all in mind when we see polling. That said, I think the focus group actually matters. Focus groups are often considered to be imperfect because, yes, they have so few people, it's a tiny sample size, but the information you get from them is valuable. Do I really think that 13 out of 15 people in the country, or even 13 out of 15 undecided voters, all think that that Pence won the debate? No. And also, it's worth noting that they were all forced to pick a side. Like Luntz said, you have to say one or the other one. So, I mean, some of those people may not have been quite as enthusiastic, but I think that does indicate that a lot more people who were watching this debate and who were undecided were swayed toward Pence than toward Harris. And this is more speculative on my part, but I would even go so far as to say that this helps the Trump ticket meaningfully. Maybe not enough, but at least in some appreciable way. Because, again, we know that President Trump has coronavirus. It is possible that that might make him either incapacitated or, God forbid, dead. I don't think so. I don't have much evidence to suggest that he's in that much trouble at all, but it's worth noting. And here's the thing. Even if he didn't have coronavirus, he's old. Biden's old. These two candidates matter. These two VP candidates matter more than any two VP candidates in U.S. history. I'm willing to make that claim. And
well, I mean, yes, because the people that they're running alongside are the oldest in U.S. history to seek the presidency for a full term, and that's something that is important to note. Furthermore, I do think that they each had different objectives that need to be addressed in order to really analyze the debate and who won coming out of it and how well they performed. So the Harris-Biden ticket needed, above all else, to focus on Trump and the coronavirus, to tie him to the shutdown of the economy, to tie him to suffering, to make him look like an incompetent, evil, racist buffoon, and to obfuscate their own records, because their own records disagree and also aren't really much to speak of. Joe Biden has been in public service for 47 years. He has no real accomplishments to speak of on many of the issues that he's campaigning against. He's not really able to campaign on changing the status quo and being this revolutionary thinker when he's been the establishment for 47 years. And Kamala Harris is running on what's supposedly a moderate ticket, trying to bring in a bunch of centrist voters who are inevitably going to be the swing in this election. But her voting record in the Senate was often to the left of Bernie Sanders. She was the senator from California. That's natural because that's the power constituency she had to appeal to in order to stay elected, to keep winning her races, to keep seizing these positions of power. But now that she is running for a different constituency, she has to appeal to them, and she has to just pretend that all of those years of leftist policy just don't matter. So the Trump administration's goal, if it wants to remain in power, was fairly obvious. They need to show the underlying divisions between the moderate messaging and the progressive policy. And aside from that, they also just needed to call out Biden and Harris's ties to the establishment. I mean, there was a very interesting moment in the debate where both of them were trying to simultaneously take their best tack, at least by their own strategy. So Harris was bringing up the fact that so many establishment Republicans, members of the Bush administration, John Kasich, had come out in support of Joe Biden. And Mike Pence simultaneously understood that the best way to refute that is just to say, we don't want those people anyway. They are the establishment. You're bragging about being part of the political establishment and the swamp that we ran against. So both candidates played to their strengths in that regard. I think since Pence got the last word, he got a bit of an edge. But I'm a little bit biased in Pence's favor anyway, so let's say that Kamala Harris actually managed to make some meaningful appeal there. But on so many issues, on fracking, calling them out for multiple recorded instances of saying they're going to ban fracking, and then them flip-flopping at the last minute. The flip-flopping is going to irritate a lot of the hardcore leftists who really do want to see fracking eliminated. It's going to also irritate a lot of the voters in crucial swing states like Pennsylvania. And if you lose fracking in Pennsylvania, you're going to lose Pennsylvania. That is an incredibly important industry there. And Joe Biden knows it, which is why he's trying to downplay all of those policy goals that he said when he was trying to win the nomination, despite the fact that he quite probably will do it either because he really wants to or because that's where the Democratic Party is at. And while Joe may pretend to be the Democratic Party, he's in no way in charge of that organization. They run him, not the other way around.
He's not even in charge of his own presidential ticket, much less his party.
Right. So, I mean, on a number of issues, the Pence-Trump ticket scored a lot of victories on highlighting the importance of the Supreme Court, on highlighting the Trump tax cuts and the fact that Harris and Biden, I should say Biden and Harris, there was a little bit of a Freudian slip there, are going to cut the Trump tax cuts, which affected, millions of Americans, not just the highest percentiles of income earners.
Let me jump in here. 85% of Americans got a tax cut under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
And Biden said he's going to repeal it, just flat out. So the Democrats also tried to make this about health care. They brought up the coronavirus, obviously, but they also tried to bring up the abolition of Obamacare, which is interesting for them because that is very much a partisan issue. But I don't think a lot of people in the center particularly liked Obamacare. It was incredibly controversial. Its passage led to the Tea Party insurgent movement that really took over in 2010 in the House and the Senate, gave the Republicans a solid majority that lasted for a very, very long time. And this is just, it's an interesting play because I guess their argument is they want to appeal to people who are concerned about pre-existing conditions, who want for healthcare to be provided in a time when there's a lot of uncertainty. And they're also trying to tie Trump to the lockdowns of all things, which is fascinating because, of course, President Trump doesn't have the authority to issue a lot of these lockdown orders. They're done on the state-by-state level, and the most aggressive people doing the lockdowns are, in fact, Democratic governors. But we can't talk about that because that would be substantive policy, and if you talk substantive policy, the Biden-Harris ticket falls apart because their whole spiel is we are going to change things, although how we're going to change things specifically we don't want to bring up because we're going to either alienate the center or we're going to alienate the left.
Quite frankly, their whole spiel is even less substantive than that. It's Orange Man bad. I mean,
I was
literally,
trying to be generous. Like, there's only so many times you can say Orange Man bad before it stops being funny because it's just depressing. But that's a
I
major
know
plank of their
it's not funny.
campaign.
This is literally what these people believe. I've given up. Like, there's really nothing you can do for these people. Nothing.
I mean, except for refer to them to this wonderful podcast where we can, give them an alternate perspective. But
And if this fails, I'm sure there are a plethora of counselors and psychiatrists who might be able to help them.
okay, this is a bit of a callback, but do you remember all those stories you would get in a slow news week about people who were going to psychiatric treatment or people who were going to marriage counseling because of issues because they had with the Trump campaign?
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of when I was saying that. Is I remember I can't sleep at night. My marriage is falling through the cracks. I'm going insane because Orange Man bad.
And yeah, so also to take this back into the realm of policy, as fun as it is to make fun of Orange Man bad, the moment where Mike Pence really cornered Kamala Harris on the Supreme Court, I thought was crucial because Trump was very aggressive in his debate with Biden on this issue because he knows it's a winner. He knows if the Democrats are going to pack the court and people know about it, the American people won't stand for it because it would be a complete disregard for our checks and balances in our constitutional system. FDR, one of the most aggressive presidents in the history of the country, if not the most aggressive at the expansion of federal and presidential power, tried and failed to pack the court because even if it's majority in both houses of Congress, people would not stand for that.
There were even people who were considered progressives in the Senate. So people who were ideological allies, not just of the broader Democrat Party, but of FDR's plan, of the New Deal, the staunchest proponents. Most of them didn't even want to get behind it.
Right. So President Trump had this issue of perpetually talking over Joe Biden. And I understood the reasoning behind it. He wanted to come off as the more dominant personality in the debate. He felt he was going up against the moderator and his interlocutor, and that's a very difficult position to be in. And he also didn't want to get Biden any sound bites, which are really some of the most important things coming out of the debate for people who aren't going to listen to it right away or going to listen to some of the news coverage.
Yeah,
and
I'll give this. The sound bites that Biden got are, come on, shut up, man. I mean, it's like just stupid stuff. I mean, he ended up sounding like a cross between an immature child and a 90-year-old grandpa who isn't quite with it.
Right, so Trump achieved a lot of his objectives in the first debate, but he also came off as rude, sort of boorish at times. Like, I love the man, don't get me wrong. I've named DJ Trump for a reason. But at the same time, he also just didn't let things breathe. I think that if he let Joe Biden trip over himself, he certainly would have done it. It's not like the man is all there. And he was able to claim victory and seem more put together than he was because he never had to finish a sentence because Trump wouldn't let him. And I think that at one particular moment, like when I said this in the past, when Trump cornered Biden and said, "You're going to pack the court," that he shouldn't have just said it repeatedly, like, "You're going to pack the court, you're going to pack the court." You should have let it sit for a while. Mike Pence did this properly. He did say it 3 times, but each time he gave Kamala Harris several opportunities to answer the question. Then when she refused, he'd ask again. And then when she refused, he'd ask again. It's like, let the record show she didn't answer the question. And refusing to answer the question in this context is basically saying you're going to pack the court. Because the uncontroversial position, the easy, schmeezy political winner is just, of course I'm not going to back the court. It's a valued institution of the United States. It keeps our democracy functioning. It allows for us to have a reasonably unbiased umpire, the nearest we can achieve with limited human means. But if they admit that they're going to pack the court, they're going to lose. So they're just trying not to admit it. But by refusing to take any stance, by leaving open the possibility so they can get away with it later without losing too much political capital, it's obvious what they're doing. I think highlighting that was incredibly effective. Also, another highlight of the debate, in my opinion, was the final refutation. Although final might be a little bit too optimistic, of the fine people on both sides argument. Like, if you listen to any Democratic speech, they always bring that up. If you're talking about a debate over the state of the country with a Democrat, one of the first things they'll say is, "Oh, Trump thinks neo-Nazis are fine people." When, if you even go 2 sentences down in that speech, I think less than 1 actually, he immediately says, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis or the white supremacists. They are awful and should be condemned." And the context was that the initial protest that eventually attracted Antifa and Unite the Right was a debate over whether or not Civil War statues should be torn down of the Confederate monuments. And Trump was making what I think was a valid point, that there are people in good faith on both sides of that argument. People who can say, well, this is the history of our region. There are a lot of people who are tied to these figures by not only kinship, but also some level of culture. And while that was a flawed time, we still want to celebrate part of who we are. And then there's the other argument, which is just that this is a symbol of a very dark time, and many of these people were absolutely abominable in their conduct, specifically with regards to the Confederacy, which was a rebel movement trying to uphold slavery, and we shouldn't glorify that in a nation of free men. And you could talk about how it perpetuates racism. You could even talk about how some of these monuments were placed in the Civil Rights era as a direct response to pressures to integrate and desegregate the South. And I think that there's a legitimate conversation to be had there, and there are people of good faith and good conscience on both sides, which is exactly the point President Trump was making. But people refused to add the sentence before and after to show who he was talking about, and they just assumed that he was talking about white supremacists. It's just absolutely ludicrous. And Mike Pence, who I think was far too reserved with the moderator in some ways, although I think it did obviously play to his favor, finally called her out on the media bias. Because for this entire time, she was asking leading, pointed questions about, oh, the Trump administration has done an absolutely horrible job on this issue. Please justify yourself. When she never pushed Kamala Harris at all. I mean, I think Mike Wallace got very petulant with Trump. I think Trump got on his nerves. I think Mike Wallace interjected into the debate too much. But I do think he at least wanted to be fair on some level before he just gave up about midway through. And Susan Page did not even try. I think she was not able to cut Mike Pence off nearly as effectively. She would try and cut him off sometimes slightly before his time limit, but she just failed at it. She didn't do as good of a job at interjecting herself into the debate. But if you looked solely at the questions, she was by far the worst moderator of the two. I mean, Wallace bailed Biden out a couple times, but he also actually asked some pointed questions. And aside from a slight barb about bringing up the Green New Deal, which is still supported on the Biden-Harris website, and which Harris was an early proponent of, which Biden has spoken favorably of, even when saying he doesn't support it, like, she just did not push Harris or the Biden ticket at all. And Mike Pence came out and said, look, this is a biased question. The media has been pushing this lie for years. It is not what the president said. You can read the script. And I've had to say that so many times in so many arguments. It just felt cathartic to see it on a national stage with 50 million people watching, so that maybe, just maybe, we can actually resolve this once and for all. A man can dream.
Yeah, a man indeed can dream and should. Again, you can only start with success by envisioning what it looks like. Anyway, I think it's important to. It's just important to basically learn some lessons from this debate too, because I think it was wildly successful. But even your successes can teach you lessons. I know people always tell you learn from your mistakes, but learn from your successes too. And I think for the conservative movement and for conservative candidates, here, I mean, at least my parting thoughts, kind of my parting lessons here for this topic are: remember to manipulate the moderator. Don't just bowl over the moderator. Make sure that the moderator does your bidding a little bit, and do so by, again, ignoring the moderator when it makes sense, but also letting the moderator eventually shut you up and, giving some token of respect so that then the moderator feels obligated to regulate your opponent to an extent, even if he or she doesn't want to.
All right, and with that, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back to analyze some of the future events that are going to define this campaign and what we know about them. So, almost immediately after the conclusion of the second debate and the revelation that Mike Pence is pretty fly for a white guy, the debate commission decided to announce that the second debate between President Donald Trump and Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President, I should specify, would be virtual, to which President Trump almost immediately said, I'm not participating in a virtual debate. This is nonsense. So it looks like going forward, the second debate is almost certainly going to be canceled unless they renegotiate something. So I look forward to seeing what happens as a result of this, because this is an incredibly interesting and somewhat unprecedented event, not entirely unprecedented. During the Republican primaries of 2016, President Trump, who was then candidate Trump, did decline to participate in one of the debates, and he was sort of the elephant in the room who was not in the room. I mean, both literally and figuratively, but I don't know, fun Republican joke. In any case, I think that strategy actually worked out reasonably well for him, because obviously he won the nomination and then the presidency. But I do want to know what George would think on the long-term implications of this political move and what Trump should have done, if he should have done anything differently.
I don't know, because the thing is, I generally agree with the idea that that you shouldn't be able to have a virtual debate. I don't like that idea because there's just so many opportunities for cheating, like getting answers, having a teleprompter or something. I just don't really. I mean, even if the moderators were fair, and just to give them the benefit of the doubt, let's say they are. And honestly, I don't think any of them really wants a cheating scandal. Now, of course, they want to give Biden every help they can, every type of help they can give him, but they don't want to risk a scandal. So
Right, they will do everything they think they can get away with, but nothing more.
that said, I think they realize that if something were to go wrong, someone would probably find out. The issue is it wouldn't be found out during the debate, so it would be hard to enforce. In any case, I think that I think Trump was right to say no to a virtual debate. I wonder whether he could have done so in a more ambiguous way to try to create some sort of solution. I think he needs another debate. Like, he's in kind of a bad spot right now, because I think honestly the first debate probably helped them with non-white voters, just as a guess. But on the other hand, I think it probably hurt him a lot with the white voters, and white voters are still the majority, and particularly a lot of white college voters are people I think he might not. He's not going to win that group, but I think he could. I think he could probably still do better among them, and I think another debate might be able to flip very few, but maybe just enough in certain swing states to him to change the conversation. Because really at this point, a lot of votes are already in. That's another thing to note. A lot of votes are already in. He basically just needs to turn out people who are going to vote on election day, and those are heavily, again, Trump voters already, Republican voters. In most years they are, and this year even more so, because so many more Democrats than Republicans are voting by mail, especially this year. But he needs to get people to turn out. So if he can do a better performance in a future debate, even if it's the last debate, and people see it and they turn out on election day, or they vote early in person or whatever, or turn in their mail-in ballots a little later, that's what he needs. He basically needs to get those last people who don't like Biden and just morally maybe, or principle, or just based on their personal interest, can't vote for Biden, but just aren't really ready to commit to Trump. He needs to basically get those people, and I think that another debate could help him with that. So I think it's really unfortunate that the second debate isn't going to work out. I hope the third debate does, at least. I would love to see the second debate work out in some way. I just don't know how.
I'm still eager for the Rogan debate that may or may not ever happen. Probably is not going to happen, because they would never want Joe Biden to have a 4-hour unscripted conversation.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, there's no way. Like, I respect Joe Rogan a lot, because I know, for one thing, he probably agrees more on policy with Biden than he does with Trump. I mean, I think he's but the fact that he was willing to basically try to give America a reasonably fair debate, and I mean, the guy does take on leftists too. I mean, he's willing to basically push people. He wants the answers. I mean, he is a good debate, or not. Well, I'm sure he's a good debater too, but he's a good moderator. He can do that with people, and I think he has the right. His heart's in the right place for this task. He's the kind of guy who actually wants to push everybody. I mean, he would give Trump hell, but he'd also give Biden hell. And that's
right.
Honestly, like, forget who the candidates are. I want to see the president, people who are going to maybe be president, have to go through sort of a hellish interview so that I can see whether they can hold up. To me, as a voter, that's important. And that's something that I think Joe Rogan is not only capable of doing, but is willing to do. And I honestly don't think any of these other moderators is either willing or able.
What does it say about the state of U.S. political discourse and media ethics when a UFC commentator is one of the most respected moderators and purveyors of discourse in the entire country. I mean, I respect Joe Rogan a lot. Obviously, I do podcasts. I would love to have a fraction of Joe Rogan's success in this area, and I think that he is helping to pioneer a format that is incredibly beneficial towards the public discourse, precisely because it is a slightly less structured and longer form medium. I think that a lot of these issues are very complex, and we would benefit from having a longer form, more discursive presentation of their merits and demerits. Very often, as we see in all these political debates, people will try and evade talk on a 10-minute question so they can move on to more favorable ground. And we see this dodging and weaving that's much more difficult to do if you're just sitting down in a natural conversation and you're talking for 4 hours. If you're sitting in a room with somebody for 4 hours and you're trying to have anything approximating a natural conversation, you're going to have to be a lot more honest in your style of communication. And furthermore, I think that would prove that these candidates actually know what they're talking about, what they are going to propose, and what they're comfortable sharing with the American public. And the American public could have an in-depth look at who these people are, how they interact in a one-on-one conversation. I think it would be an absolutely brilliant move going forward. I don't think it'll happen this election cycle, but I am a big fan of long-form podcasts as a medium of education, discussion, and entertainment. And I think that if they would become the new gold standard for political debate, that would be absolutely glorious. So enough about plugging my own medium. I think we should go on to some other mediums that I would love to have a fraction of the success of. So Rush Limbaugh is also supposedly going to be turning over his show to President Trump in lieu of the virtual debate, which was going to be a town hall debate where people would be allowed to ask the candidate questions. President Trump is going to do this unilaterally, where apparently he's going to have a radio rally, as they're calling it, where people will be allowed to mail in questions. Well, I think obviously these questions are going to be screened and pre-selected, which is a little bit less ideal than a situation. I mean, I say less ideal, but a similar fact happens even during the town hall debates, because obviously they don't just let anyone in near these candidates who are under serious Secret Service protection. But I do think it'd be interesting to have this sort of format with both candidates, but I also think it's incredibly interesting that we're going to have more of a long-form event with President Trump, who obviously gravitates to many of these long-form styles. He very much enjoys his own rallies, so I'm curious to see where this goes. I think it could be very interesting. I think it could energize the base, which, as we've discussed about endlessly earlier, is going to be incredibly crucial for Trump to win, because he really needs to energize his base on Election Day to make up for the inevitable ballot deficit for mail-ins.
Oh, yeah. I think the thing to note here is that I know what campaigns are doing because I've talked to people on campaigns, and I've also just kind of, even people I don't know, I've paid attention to their Twitters and other things, and I've just kind of heard what people who are willing to kind of share what they're actually doing, I've heard what they're up to. And persuasion, of course, like some people are still doing that, but that's not the main focus at this point in a campaign. By the time you get to, I would say, mid-September, usually is when things to just get out the freaking vote. You know, it's more about get people out to vote. You need to get all the people who kind of support you, who may support you, but are kind of lazy and don't want to go to the polls. President Obama, back in, I believe this is the 2012 re-election campaign, he talked about Cousin Pookie. So this was talking to a generally black audience about their supposed Cousin Pookie, and whoever Cousin Pookie was, basically saying that, you need to get your cousin off the couch to go vote and whatever. I mean, this is basically the real deal here for any party. Obama was 100% right. You need to get your people who maybe, kind of like the president, but don't feel, too interested in actually going to the effort of voting. And now I will say with mail-in ballots, that is easier for most people of any party, I guess. And if they want to go out to vote, that's available too for most people, or I think pretty much for everybody. Additionally, you need to get out the people who I would support Trump, or I would support Biden, but quite frankly, you need to get, each campaign needs to get those people who have those issues, and you basically need to say, look, we need you to vote this time. This is what you're going for. So like just from a purely nonpartisan, just like an objective understanding of what needs to happen at this point. If you are a campaign, you want to get those people out to vote. And I will note one more thing. Even earlier in the campaign, people talk about persuasion versus, flipping votes versus just getting out turnout. So yes, people say, oh, well, it's more important to change votes because if you flip one vote to the other from one candidate to the other, that's an effective net gain of 2 votes, right? Because you take away one from the other candidate and you give one to your candidate. But one thing I believe that Brad Purscale actually found, I mean, obviously he's gone off the deep end recently, but his research was actually pretty solid. I think it was something to the effect of like, in terms of at least internet ads, and of course that's only a subset of advertisement and general political spending, but it costs about 6 times as much to flip a voter from one candidate to the other versus to turn out one of your voters who wasn't going to turn out otherwise. So again, you're getting 2 times the benefit, but you're paying 6 times the price. So even earlier on, I would personally make a pitch as a consultant. Your bigger focus should be turnout because it's a better bang for your buck. And at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, all the campaigns have a ton of money. Now Trump still he had a money advantage early on, but now Biden has it at this point in the campaign and has for a little while now. In any case, both campaigns, it's in their best interest to spend that money as wisely as they can, as efficiently as they can. And turnout made sense throughout the whole time, arguably, but more than ever now, you shouldn't be relying on changing people's minds at the last minute. The only thing you want to change their mind about is whether it's worth them to get out to vote.
Well, I personally have a list of about a dozen people I need to bother. That list should probably be longer, truth be told. But I think if you're particularly serious about this election, we all know people who lean a certain way but aren't necessarily entirely convinced. That is your job. You need to talk to them. You need to win them over. So get on it.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that. Make sure that you get your people out to vote. Yes, get your cousin Pookie, whoever that might be, whoever's sitting on the couch watching, whatever sports game on ESPN. You need to get that person out to vote. Whoever is, too busy out in the garden, get that person out to vote for Trump, and for Republicans down ballot. Whatever they're doing, make sure they make some time to vote. Make a plan to vote. And again, I would personally recommend if you want to vote by mail, if you have drop boxes nearby, I would prefer that to the post office, not just because of any risk of postal worker malfeasance. I mean, the Postal Workers Union has endorsed Joe Biden, so that is a concern that maybe if they assume you're a Trump voter, they might treat your ballot differently. I'm not going to necessarily accuse them of that. I think it's possible, but that's not even the focus. They're facing so many mail-in ballots right now that even if they're perfectly fair, the incompetence in counting the ballots that go through the post office, go through their mail, I mean, they're just not competent to handle this many ballots. And honestly, I don't even know if I expect them to be because they've been given a much bigger task than they're used to. And I don't think any amount of money would have solved that problem. So if you have a drop box nearby, you can drop off your mail-in ballot there in at least most states. And that's another option so that it gets to a secure location where it's going to get picked up and counted. And then also, of course, you can vote in person early in a lot of states. And then on election day, of course, any state should let you vote in person. So you have options. Just keep that in mind, for whoever it is, and figure out what option makes sense for whoever it is that you're trying to get to turn out to vote for the president and for down ballot Republicans. So, that's my pitch for getting your people out to vote and also my bit of advice on how to go about that.
All right. I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up the show as well. All of our controversial comments aside, go out and vote. If you agree with our controversial comments, go out and vote, especially. We need you. And
if you
I'm looking forward to
stay home.
You're not supposed to say that part out loud, George.
Hey,
but
better to be explicit.
Fair enough. And with that in mind, I'm looking forward to Trump 2020 and Pence 2024. That's going to be a good time. This is DJ Trump signing out.